The Jaguar F-TYPE R brings some big guns to the sports car sector. With a 550 PS supercharged 5-litre V8 underneath the bonnet and a clever electronic active differential to transmit all that torque to the tarmac, along with the option of all-wheel drive. There are both coupe and convertible body style choices, and either way, this car will bludgeon its way to 62 miles an hour in just 4 seconds, on the way to a top speed of nearly 190 miles an hour. If you can afford one of these, then quite an experience is in store. Jaguar used to make some great sports cars. It still does. If you doubt that, then here's one you need to drive, the F-TYPE R. It sells for the kind of money you'd need to buy a top-level Porsche 911 Carrera S, which will make it seem quite expensive if your perception of an F-Type is of something more Porsche Cayman-like. Caymans, though, are targeted by V6-powered F-Type models. This V8 is a very different proposition, offering more than 50% more power and torque than its lesser stablemate. With 550 PS on tap and a thrilling soundtrack from this 5-litre supercharged V8, it's well capable of taking on really exotic sports cars like Aston Martin's V8 Vantage and the Maserati GT. On that basis, you could even argue that whether you select this car as a convertible or as here in fixed-top coupe form, it's actually reasonable value. Most potential buyers, though, will probably be cross-shopping against that Porsche 911 model I mentioned earlier. And for them, Jaguar's decision to add all-wheel drive as an option on this model will cement this F-Type's position as a credible rival to the Stuttgart brand. This is, in short, a very complete, very special machine indeed, as we're about to find out. I can't remember ever approaching a drive in a Jaguar with a greater sense of anticipation. Like any true sports car, it looks poised and ready even when it's standing still. Drive me, it seems to say as you approach and the door handle springs out to greet you. Start me, it seems to shout once you're enveloped in the figure-hugging sports seats and angled towards the little copper-coloured starter button. Rev me, it seems to insist, as you fire the engine and a spectacular set of aural fireworks begin. Personally, I usually like my automotive sound effects to come from the engine rather than, as here, the tailpipes at the back, but even I have to admit that this car hums an addictive tune. For driver involvement, it really had to be that way, for the petrol power plants on offer aren't of the Porsche high-revving kind and weren't originally developed for sports car use. The supercharging means that the very considerable pulling power would normally be developed quietly but effectively very low in the rev range. Just what you'd want in an XF or XJ luxury saloon, and very impressive in an F-Type 2, provided it can here be accompanied by a howling crescendo as you power through the gears and the horizon spools towards you on fast forward. Which is precisely what you get thanks to Jaguar's clever active exhaust system, which makes enough noise on startup to continually annoy your neighbours if you're in the habit of making early starts. At least you won't be hanging around long enough for them to serve you with an ASBO notice. The quick-shift 8-speed auto gearbox offers a dynamic launch mode so that you can indulge in Grand Prix-style starts, the electronics firing you up the road in addictive fashion. Well, in the dry anyway. Try that in the wet, and in this standard rear-wheel drive model, traction will be at a premium. Tick the box for the all-wheel drive option though, and it'll be very different. This torque-on-demand system works with a clever IDD intelligent driveline dynamics strategy to exploit the maximum performance potential of all that extra traction while still keeping this car's natural rear-wheel drive character. Indeed, your all-wheel drive F-Type will always direct power to its rear wheels unless the IDD system detects a loss of traction and demands a proportion of torque to be directed frontwards. I think I'd want all-wheel drive as a non-negotiable in buying this car. It is, after all, a key tool in controlling the awesome potential of the 550 PS, 5-litre supercharged V8 that beats beneath your right foot. This flagship variant puts out a prodigious 680 Newton-meters of torque, which is one reason why there's no manual gearbox option at this level. As a result, 60 miles an hour is achievable in around 4 seconds, en route to a top speed that you'd find would be limited to 186 miles an hour, were you able to achieve it on a deserted autobahn or your own private runway. As with the lesser V6S model, a clever torque vectoring by braking system is provided. This imperceptibly brakes your inner wheels through the bends, finally adjusting the trajectory of the car for optimal handling. As a result, the available grip is always optimised, allowing you to carry more speed both into and out of corners. You really feel the effects of that on this F-Type R, for all that torque vectoring cleverness is combined with an electronic active differential that intelligently controls the amount of torque fed to each wheel. As a result, you should certainly be getting some impressive G-forces through the curves in this car. So yes, if you think a Jaguar sports car will be a softer, less focused option than, say, a rival Porsche 911, you really need to try this F-Type. Steering feel, of course, is key on a machine of this sort, something Jaguar has been able to deliver in spite of the decision to switch from an old-tech hydraulic to a new-tech, more efficient EPAS electric system. The remote over-assisted response at the helm was always the thing that used to put me off sporting Jaguars. At last, the brand has sorted this issue with a system that, if not quite Porsche-like in its response, is now at least properly enthusiast-orientated, so that if you want to, you can really enjoy flinging this car about. If you're thinking of doing that, then you'll need to make the best use of the 3 very different driving modes that this car offers. There's a normal one for slippery surfaces, and a dynamic mode. Activate dynamic and the whole experience comes alive, both steering and shifting taking on an even more aggressive demeanour, with a weightier feel at the helm and super fast changes that also adapt themselves to road conditions, cornering and your driving style. At the same time, throttle response is sharper and there's a slight loosening of the stability system's safety net. In this F-Type R V8, the damping will sharpen up too, thanks to an adaptive dynamic system that controls body movement, roll and pitch. You can tweak any of the individual dynamic system elements with configurable menus hidden away in this touchscreen infotainment system, enabling you to specifically set up your F-Type to your own personal preferences, much as a race team would set up a race car. You also get a dynamic eye display on the infotainment touchscreen, complete with G-force readings and lap times. So, ultimately, what does it all mean? Have Jaguar really built a world beater here? Ultimately, it depends on what you want. Though this stiffer, sharper coupe model is much more of a driver's car than its convertible stablemate, it isn't the best track car in its class, which is fine because it doesn't necessarily need to be. The few potential buyers who will regularly be pounding round on circuit days will be better off in a Lotus or a Porsche. Choose an Exige or a 911 if you want a car in this class that'll really make you feel like Fernando Alonso. This car is engineered primarily for roadway thrills, with a few roadway scares thrown in. Of course, not every journey needs to be a red mist experience, so it's nice to be able to report that you should find yourself also enjoying this F-Type R, even when you're not driving it hard, thanks to a suspension setup that eases you over bumpy or broken surfaces, giving the car a beautiful point-to-point flow, whether in town or on the highway. No one does this kind of thing better than the engineers at Jaguar. Engaging, precise, intuitive and alive. The definitive sports coupe. That's the way that Jaguar describes this car, and for once, the marketing rhetoric isn't too far from the mark, underlining the Coventry company's determination to go its own way and offer something different. As with the convertible model, the shape's an interesting one, defined once more by what are described as heart lines. Get beyond the muscular clamshell bonnet with its signature power bulge, then turn your attention to this bold, angular Jaguar front grille, and you'll pick up the first of these in the blade dissecting the shark-like gills that dominate both front corners of the car. It's a crease that runs along the top of the wing, defining its shape, then flowing on into the door before gracefully disappearing rearwards. Here you pick up a second heartline that swells out to form the muscular rear haunch before sweeping dramatically around a sharply proportioned tail section emphasised by wraparound LED lamps and an active rear spoiler that raises at 70 miles an hour, then lowers to fit flush when the speed drops below 50 miles an hour. Look down here and you can identify the engine on offer. If this were a V6 model, you'd have twin centre tailpipes, as opposed to the signature quad outboard-mounted exhausts fitted to this faster V8. This F-Type R is further distinguished by its gloss black front vanes, flat side sill extensions and unique window trim. It's the third heartline, though, that really defines the distinctive look of this coupe body style. You've got this dramatic cabin rearward sweeping roof profile. Providing an unbroken silhouette, it aims to highlight the visual drama of the tapered cabin nestled between these powerful rear haunches. There's also a lovely, unique side window graphic that's there to accentuate the compactness of the car and the roof profile. If you've opted for an all-wheel drive version, distinguishing touches include a deeper bonnet power bulge and more distinctive vents. Details like these add the finishing touches to what is a unique piece of penmanship, one that Jaguar's Director of Design Ian Callum says he's inspired by every time he sees it. As usual, the really significant elements are those you can't see. There's no central B-pillar because the structure here, braced instead by high-strength alloy beams that run from front to rear, doesn't need it. The result is a platform that's nearly 80% stiffer than that of the F-Type convertible and the most torsionally rigid production car that Jaguar has ever built. Yes, even with this huge panoramic glass roof panel fitted. The entire structure is bonded and riveted rather than welded, and the side panels are single-piece aluminium pressings. It's all suggestive of lightweight, a goal that perhaps would have been realised without the hefty supercharged engines that must reside up front. These offset many of the weight gains created through the high-tech structure, creating a car 300 to 400 kilograms heavier than its direct Porsche rivals. Here, as I've been saying, I've opted for the coupe body style, but the F-Type R is also offered as a desirable convertible too. The drop-top version's roof isn't the kind of heavy metal folding deal you'll find in rival Mercedes sports cars. That would have upset the low centre of gravity and near 50-50 weight distribution the engineers prioritised so much with the lightweight aluminium architecture of this design. So it's a multi-layered fabric affair with a thick, thinsulate lining that raises or lowers in just 12 seconds and doesn't need a panel or a tonneau cover to smooth it over when stowed. In other words, everything about this car is beautifully engineered, something you also realise the first time you grasp one of the lovely pop-out door handles, there to provide what the brand calls a mechanical handshake, and take a seat inside. The door sills aren't excessively wide or deep, so you can climb in quite gracefully and lure yourself into a focused, enveloping cockpit that sits you 20 millimetres lower than you would be in an XK and curves itself around your body. It's certainly very firmly driver-orientated thanks to these lovely winged and prominently side-bolstered performance seats. As in the convertible version, the two front occupants are separated by this prominent grab handle, which sweeps down from the top of the centre console and on automatic models wraps around behind this joystick-shaped sport shift gear selector. In contrast to other Jaguar models, there's no rotary gear shift controller here. Good. It's all symptomatic of the design team's determination to create something very different. An intimate place where luxury is not allowed to supersede purpose. Over your shoulder, the view is framed by an oval rear window that references the old E-Type but restricts your vision enough to make the standard rear parking sensors essential. You could go further and pay extra for a reverse parking camera, but that comes with the aesthetic blemish of a camera mounting blister on the boot lid. On a car this beautiful, little details like that matter. It's not perfect, of course. The paddle shift selectors are rubberized plastic when they should be metallically fashioned. The steering column stalks feel a bit cheap, and there's one of those fiddly electronic handbrake switches. I don't think the typical sports car leg straight out driving position will suit everyone either, but the copper-coloured starter button is nice. So is the way the washer jets are mounted on the wipers to clear a murky screen so much more effectively. I also like the small diameter 3-spoke leather trimmed wheel. It's got Alcantara trim here on this V8 version, which frames a brace of analogue instruments separated by a TFT information screen. Anything you want to know that it can't tell you will probably be covered by this car's much improved in-control touch infotainment system with its 8-inch colour touchscreen, text-to-voice messaging, in-control apps and 3D navigation displays. On this F-Type R variant, it's even more high-tech thanks to the inclusion of this dynamic eye display system there as part of a standard configurable dynamics feature that allows the driver to define which characteristics are altered when dynamic mode is selected. Dynamic Eye includes a G-force meter and can show you a lap time readout, plus you can monitor throttle, steering and brake inputs on the display screen. Fortunately, the infotainment display hasn't been further overburdened by also having to be the main point of control for the ventilation. Though you've got graphics for that here, the main functions for it are separated out into the 3 chunky heater dials that sit beneath. Now, talking of climate control, at first glance there don't seem to be many cabin air vents. That's because 2 of them are hidden away on top of the centre console, rising automatically to clear the screen and cool the cabin only when needed. Lovely. As with a Porsche Cayman, but unlike a Porsche 911 or a Jaguar XK, there are no occasional use rear seats for children, just a shallow cubby and a pair of coat hooks. That's a slight disappointment for me as a family man. Talking of practicality, apart from this bin at shoulder height, the one I just mentioned between the seats, you've also got an armrest cubby and twin cup holders. The glove box is a decent size, but the door bins are almost useless. Out back, this F-Type coupe gives you substantially more luggage space than you'd get in its convertible counterpart, up to 407 litres as opposed to 196 litres. That's a bit less than the combined front and rear cargo area offered by a rival Porsche Cayman, probably because of the fact that due to the location of the rear axle, the boot here has to remain quite shallow. That said, it's considerably bigger than that provided by a Porsche 911 and easily large enough for 2 sets of golf clubs. Pricing for this F-Type R starts at around £87,000 for this coupe variant, or at just over £92,000 for the convertible version. In either case, you've the option of finding a premium of just under £5,000 more if you want the all-wheel drive variant. This kind of pricing seems to have been pitched with Porsche in mind. 2- and 4-wheel drive versions of the German company's rival 911 Carrera S PDK model offer near identical levels of performance for much the same kind of money. Standard equipment on this top model includes larger 20-inch alloy wheels, quad exhaust pipes, gloss black side sill extensions, a switchable active sports exhaust, an electronic active differential, the torque vectoring by braking setup, and the uprated Jaguar Super braking system with red calipers. Inside there's an R-themed premium leather interior with twin stitching, a flat-bottomed leather R-Sport steering wheel with lovely tactile gear shift paddles, and a dynamic eye display on the infotainment touchscreen for the configurable dynamic driving mode. That touchscreen offers various in-control apps and a satellite navigation system. Do try and stretch to this huge panoramic glass roof which floods the cabin with light, though unfortunately doesn't have the magic feature you get in Mercedes SL of being able to lighten or darken at the press of a button. Don't bother with the powered tailgate. Honestly, could you really not live without one of those? Finally, there's the pricey option of ceramic brakes, though if you're likely to be driving fast enough to get the benefit of those on a public road, then you might as well simply stop at the nearest police station and give yourself up. Earlier I mentioned the possibility of adding various apps that can come as part of the in-control touch infotainment package. Some of these really are very clever. The Remote Premium app allows you to use your smartphone for things like checking how much fuel is in your tank, whether the windows are closed and whether the alarm has been activated. It also allows you to remotely lock or unlock your car and reset its alarm from anywhere in the world. There's also a beep and flash feature to help drivers find their car in crowded car parks. My wife would love that. With this app, you can even start the engine remotely so that, for example, you can get the car warming itself up nicely outside your front door before your journey begins. There's also an in-control secure option I definitely want, which provides proactive vehicle monitoring. This means that should your car be stolen, a tracking service can more easily work with law enforcement agencies to recover it. Jaguar's in-control technologies also relate to safety. Should you be involved in an accident, the car's integrated telematics module will automatically call the emergency services and notify them of your vehicle's location. As for more conventional safety features, well, you won't find the sheer depth of electronic trickery that would be available for this kind of money in, say, a BMW or Mercedes sports car. There's enough, though, to properly compete with what's provided by a more direct rival, Porsche. That means inclusion of a smart airbag system, tyre pressure monitoring, the usual electronic assistance for traction and braking, and an electronic stability control system with a track mode that loosens the reins but cuts in extremis. There's also the option of a blind spot monitoring system that stops you from dangerously pulling out to overtake in front of another driver. This setup can also be ordered with a reverse traffic detection system that'll also help when you're reversing blindly out of a parking space. So to the costs of running this car. This is not an inexpensive machine, but Jaguar is entitled to charge the way the Germans do, providing it can match their technology. In terms of efficiency, you might wonder about that. For a start, all that this car's much trumpeted aluminium underpinnings do is to make up for the prodigious weight of the supercharged engines used beneath the bonnet, or almost make up for them. Typically, an F-Type coupe is still around 300 to 400 kilograms heavier than its comparable Porsche counterpart. On top of that, if you know anything about big capacity supercharged petrol engines, you'll know that they're thirsty beasts. It's not a promising start if you're at all concerned over likely running costs. As a result, the figures of this F-Type R, 26.4 miles to the gallon and 255 grams per kilometre in either coupe or convertible form, trail a little behind those of a rival Porsche 911 Carrera S PDK. Go for the all-wheel drive version and the respective figures are 25.0 mpg and 269 grams per kilometre. Having said all of that, no one is going to expect a Jaguar with performance able to nudge up towards 200 miles an hour to be in any respect a frugal thing. And as with any proper performance sports car, if you manage to get anywhere near the manufacturer's quoted figures in regular real-world motoring, you probably shouldn't have bought the thing in the first place. If you want to make yourself feel good about the costs of running the V8 model, then the fact that it'll cost around 30% less to run than, say, Aston Martin's V8 Vantage or Maserati's GT 4.7 V8 may be enough to salve your green conscience. It'll also help that you get quite a large 72-litre fuel tank, 10% bigger than the one provided in, say, a Porsche 911, and large enough to make a 500-mile driving range theoretically possible on a long-distance trip. What else? Well, you might also want to bear in mind that this top V8 version will cost you no more to insure than the base V6 model. All F-Type variants are rated at a top-of-the-shop Group 50. The bigger issue will probably be residual values. And the way things are looking right now, there isn't a lot to choose between Porsche and Jaguar in that respect. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Then there's maintenance. Jaguar offers a servicing package over either 3 or 5 years that's very well worth specifying. Finally, if you want to justify your purchase of a supercharged, petrol-powered Jaguar sports car to green bearded friends, you could point out to them that half the content of the bodywork of this car comes from recycled metal, and that its structure is exclusively riveted and bonded, a manufacturing process that emits up to 80% less CO2 than would be necessary in creation of an ordinary car's steel structure. There are, it seems, more dynamic ways to be green. It's hard to see how Jaguar could have done a lot better with this F-Type R. If potential owners had approached the Coventry company with a wish list, you can't imagine that it would have emerged much differently. At launch, you could have griped about the lack of all-wheel drive and maybe the clunky infotainment system, but both of those problems have now been sorted. Are there remaining issues? Well, perhaps this car could be a little lighter and more efficient. That's about it. Other than that, this is a British sports car to be proud of. It'll need to be, of course. After all, this F-Type R faces some serious competition, not only from Porsche's evergreen 911, but also from models like Aston Martin's V8 Vantage, Maserati's sleek Gran Turismo, and the modernist Mercedes-Benz AMG GT. Still, if you're fortunate enough to be browsing in this segment and you like your sports cars elegant but with a serious side order of attitude, then this Jaguar has to be in contention. I don't think it'll suit many who associate performance motoring from this brand with XJS or XK models. Buckle such people up behind the wheel and they're liable to be a little taken aback. No matter, Jaguar needed to find a younger, more demanding, hungrier audience for its sports cars. It needed to convince people like me that here and now, in this market, at this time in history, it could be great again. Mission accomplished.